Right now, I barely have enough strength to write, and my memories of the events that transpired a week ago are still fuzzy. Let's just say one thing. I'm still here. Still inside this cursed building. Weaker than ever. Maxim wasn't joking that he was going to burn down the entire stairwell. I and some others tried to convince him not to do it. We reminded him that he could catch on fire as well, that there was at least 2 innocent people in there, that one of whom was a young man who wouldn't be able to escape. But none of it mattered to him. "We just have to start the fire big enough to make them come towards the roof," he said, maniacally nodding to his own words. "We'll be waiting for them up there, and once they emerge..." He made a slashing motion with his hand. "After that, we can put the fire out." "Yeah, you'll try to," I reminded him. "Fire is no joke. Who knows how big it may grow?" "Well, we'll do our best," he reassured me in an impatient tone, but I wasn't gonna let it slide. "And what about the welder? And his son?" I reminded him. "They're just prisoners there, and they won't be able to escape the fire or the smoke. Are you ready to burn them down?" I looked him in the eye, trying to guilt him into abandoning his idea, but Maxim didn't look away. Instead, he looked me straight in the eye, and I could see the flames that of his anger were getting wilder. "And how can you be so sure that they're just prisoners in there? Because they said so? Why did they make such a convenient cage door for them, huh? Why did they lock us in here?" "Because his son," I tried to explain, but Maxim stopped me before I could finish. "No, that's just what he says. And personally, I think he's full of shit. He didn't have to lock us all in here, alright. He could have just stayed in his apartment and be done with it. So unless you have a better plan, we're going to do it my way," he said before turning around to leave. "I do, actually," I said to his back. He turned around and nodded for me to continue talking. "My plan was crazy and dangerous, potentially, even more so than the one that Maxim offered, and way more complicated. But in my plan, the threat could be contained, while Maxim was basically offering to burn us all down. So after listening to what I had to offer, he agreed to go with it. "At least we can still burn it all down if your plan goes wrong," he grunted. "You start tonight. I'll find a few men who can assist you. If your plan doesn't work by sunrise, we go with mine." I was too anxious to stay alone, so I decided to spend the rest of the day at Natasha's place. Her apartment was crowded. A few women were helping her tend to the old man. He was breathing heavily and his face was very pale, but his bleeding had stopped and he was conscious again. "Young man, thank you," he said, wincing from the pain at the same time. It was obvious that talking was causing him quite a lot of pain. "I didn't do anything," I said, and frankly, that was the truth. The old man was just too confused to realize what had happened, and that I had abandoned him and went after Natasha, not even bothering to call for help, but he just smiled at me. "So modest." "Lay still and don't waste your strength," one of the women told him. "You're too weak for that." He didn't pay her words any attention. "I'm sorry, young man," he whispered weakly, "and to you all, I'm sorry as well. It was our hubris to expect anything else." "He's delusional. Don't mind his words," one of the older ladies warned me and Natasha. "For the first time, I am quite sane, thank you," the man denied with some degree of irritation before wincing from the pain. "Listen," he talked to me again. "There's no forgiving us for what we've done. It was a difficult time. The entire world was our enemy, but still, we thought that we'd failed. But we were thinking globally. We were only thinking about them as if they were weapons aimed at the enemy. We never thought that they'd be so effective against the civilians, against our own people, if they ever broke out. We underestimated them. We thought they were already gone." "Quit your old ramblings, you fool! And you two, go!" the old woman told me and Natasha. "Can't you see you're agitating him? We need him to rest." "This is my apartment," Natasha objected, but the woman just scowled. "You'll be back here tomorrow. Go hang out at your boyfriend's place." She nodded at me. "He's not..." Okay. Natasha gave in, seeing that there was no use arguing. I nodded towards the door. She nodded back, and we headed out. "Heed my words. There will be more. You need to get out of here while you still can, or they will trample you, along with everyone else." The last words of this old man sounded like an ominous warning. It was deep in the night when we started executing my plan. The first thing we needed was a lure. It was tough finding a piece of meat. Nobody wanted to share. And when they'd heard why we needed it, they'd spin a finger at their temple to show us what they did think of our idea. But after a few hours of searching, we finally found what we were looking for. And then, it was time for the next part of our plan. We brought it to the basement with us and headed towards the furthest door, the one that led to the stairwell that Maxim wanted to burn down so much. The door must have been locked on the hanging lock from the other side, but it was old and wooden. There was ways to get past it. The trick was to just do it completely silently. And on that, we spent a good 3 hours trying to drill a hole through the wood with a wimble that we borrowed from an old carpenter. Making one crank at a time, listening all the while to the noises on the other side. In the complete silence, we could hear the thugs who were on Overwatch drinking and talking, and the nauseating hoarse voice of a bad singer they were listening to. It still rings in my ears. But at any moment, the music could stop, and their tone could change from cheerful to worried, which could only mean one thing. We were busted. Throughout our operation, I could think about only one thing. Our failure meant the death of the welder. Even if we could miraculously retrieve his tools from the ashes, that price was just too high to pay. After about 2 hours, the wimble's drill finally reached the nail which held the lock hinge in place, and we spent the next hour working around it, taking turns and trying to make the hole bigger, until finally, the nail was separated from the wood. The hanging lock was just hanging from the doorframe now, and the door could just be opened. I took my boots off and entered the stairwell. From then on, I was on my own. It only made sense for me to be the one to bear all the risks. After all, it was my plan. The men were just one floor above me. I could hear them now with perfect clarity. One wrong step, one noise, and they would come rushing down towards me. It was time for the greatest gamble of my life. I reached out towards one of the doors, unlocked, of course. Why would they lock it if they left it? They knew that the first floor was dangerous, that the ape could break down the gates on their windows. And so did I. I headed towards the kitchen and opened up the window and put a piece of meat on the floor. Then carefully, taking a knife out the drawer, I slit my left palm and drew some blood, raining a few drops onto the piece of meat. The plan was now set in motion. I didn't know how well the ape could smell, but I banked on the fact that by sunrise it would be tempted enough to break down the gates and enter the stairwell, where it would probably quickly deal with all the bandits. I hoped that the old welder would have enough sense to lock the door before that happened. Taking one last look at my trap before I left, I headed towards the exit. I made sure to leave the door open. That way, either the creature would find its way out of the apartment, or the bandits would see it and lure it out on their own. I headed towards the basement door, only to find it left wide open. The hammer, the nails, and pieces of furniture, improvised wooden planks that we'd planned to use to barricade the door afterwards, were lying right next to it, abandoned. Weird, I thought to myself before I heard it. The pitter-patter of many legs that were getting closer with each second, coming straight out of the basement that I had come from. The windows was all I could think before I turned around and ran. The windows, the tiny windows that lined the walls of the basement, were an easy way for the crawler to get in. We'd never seen it, so we had no clue where it had been able to sneak in. And now, it was in there, cutting me off from safety and pinning me between a rock and a hard place, and it was approaching fast. I didn't have a lot of time to spare. I had two options, really. Run back into the apartment that I had just left, where the bait was waiting for the ape, or run up the stairs towards the bandits, and hope that their shooting skills weren't great. I chose the second option. In a crisis, the primates had always sought to gain an elevated position or move towards their peers, and that instinct, buried deep within my psyche, re-emerged in my time of need. The men were so drunk and so bewildered by my sudden appearance that none of them reached for their gun. They just watched me with surprised eyes as I rushed past them and towards the third floor, up towards apartment 73. Open up! I shouted as I started furiously banging on the door. I'm Natasha's friend! Open up! On the floor below me, the men screamed in terror. One of the screams was cut short by a pair of mighty jaws. Or mandibles? They crushed the man's throat either way. A second later, I heard gunshots. And then the men above me, the ones who guarded the fourth floor, started coming down to see what was going on. I could hear their hurried steps. In a second, they would turn the corner and see me, trying to break into their most important prisoner's apartment. The key clanked, and the door suddenly budged. I jumped to the side and let it open, and saw the old man inside, wrinkly-faced and wide-eyed. "Hey, who the fuck are you?" I heard right behind me. They were just one flight of stairs away. I pushed the old man aside, and I jumped inside his apartment, locking the door behind me, and listened. They rushed past the door. There were more pressing matters to take care of on the floor below. "I'm Natasha's friend. I've come here to rescue you. Grab your metal saw or gas torch or whatever it is you have, and let's go," I said quickly. He tried to interrupt me, but I stopped him with a gesture. "I'll carry your son, don't worry about it." "I don't have a gas torch anymore," he said. I shook my head. I couldn't have heard it right. "What?" I asked him. "I'm out of gas. I used it all up cutting the railings for the cage on the roof," he explained. "So you don't have anything to cut through the metal?" I inquired. It seemed impossible. No, it couldn't be right. He shook his shoulders. "I'm afraid not." "But you told Natasha that you had the tools," I roared at him. "I do, but they're useless. I just wanted to save my son," he explained, and pointing towards the door to another room. "I just wanted someone to carry him out of here." He didn't have the tools. My quest for him was pointless. I slid down the door and grabbed my head. I spent a few minutes like that, just listening to the noises outside. The men rushed back to the fourth floor, shooting at their pursuer, and after a few minutes, the sound of fighting and struggling stopped. I had to get out. I had no reason to stay here any longer. Should any of the bandits survive, they'll come see who I was. I opened the door. "Wait, you're leaving? But I can't carry him without you," the old man pleaded. "Please, I walked out, and I closed the door behind me. I moved back to the basement carefully, yet at the same time, I couldn't feel any fear anymore. It all seemed pointless at that moment. 2 weeks that I harbored hope that we'd be able to get out through the sewers, and now all hope was lost. The second floor had 2 corpses on it. One of them was still clutching a pistol. I wasn't thinking about my survival at that moment, but I thought that it could still come in handy in the future. I grabbed the gun and pulled, only to realize that the hand holding it wasn't dead yet. The man that I thought had been dead opened his eyes and looked at me. He was too weak to form words, but he already had enough strength to form a scowl. He recognized me, and he knew that it was me who let the crawler in. A shot rang and I tumbled down the flight of the stairs, clutching my side. The pain instantly snapped me back to reality, my survival instincts coming back online. I wanted to live. I wanted to live no matter how bleak my future looked. What if the crawler heard it? What if something else had heard it? I'm losing blood. I need to hurry. My brain was producing one-rush thought after another. I descended into the basement, squeezing my wound. I could barely see in the darkness, but luckily, I was alone in there. I put my hand on the handle of the door that led to the stairwell. Nothing. I pulled at it again, but it still didn't budge. It wasn't that I was too weak to open it. It was locked. I looked back through the window lining the wall, locking on the door. I was too scared to shout for someone to open it. I knocked again and heard some noises, but they weren't coming from the other side of the door. They were coming from the apartment where I left the bait. It seemed that the ape had finally took it. When I heard its roar, heard the noise at which the grates were separated from the wall, I shuddered. I had nowhere to run. I was cornered. I could still smell the blood on me. And if it could smell the blood on me, I could feel my palm was full of blood, and that there was probably a trail of blood drops behind me. My only hope was that it would be drawn towards the bloodbath on the second floor. I sat down near the door, and I closed my eyes. There was no point in staying alert. If anything, I had to make sure that I'd make as few sounds as possible. The sounds were starting to get quiet. The last thing I heard was its footsteps as it entered the stairwell and sniffed the air. That's where I was found in the morning, lying unconscious from all the blood loss, right next to the door. Thankfully, someone had found me before I froze to death. Otherwise, you obviously wouldn't be listening to this. Throughout the last week, I was trying to recover my strength. Natasha was taking good care of me, and thankfully, she found penicillin somewhere, but so I don't have to worry about any infections. It did trick my digestive system though, which was less than ideal in my situation. The bullet went clean through, though there were 2 wounds on me. At least they didn't have to cut it out of me. I'm starting to regain my strength bit by bit, but with our limited food resources, it was tough. In fact, we're going to run out of food in just a few days. The tenants pulled all of their food and started rationing it. A surprise development for sure, but very soon there will be none left. I heard that some men were trying to raid nearby grocery stores. Not all of them returned. They hoped that once I recover, I'll join them. I can't object to that. They've been feeding me for the last week after all. But I can't help but think that we need to get out. Once food runs out, we'll be too weak to do that. So, the next update will probably be the last one.